Oh, you're on mute, Burgess.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, Michael.
Mayor Jerome, we're ready.
We're all set?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's get it started. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for being here this morning, which is our final solutions table of 2020. Before I go any further, I would absolutely be remiss if I did not give a special thanks to Prophetess Burgess Peoples. Since I met her a couple of years ago, she's been phenomenal, completely engaged in the community in a number of ways. But presently, she's operating as the City of Gary's liaison to the faith leadership community, a role that she's taken very seriously and one that she's engaged in. In fact, many of you know that she spent countless hours on the phone, emails, conversations to try to keep these sort of conversations going. So to that end, Burgess, I want to say thank you on behalf of the entire city and everyone who's been a part of these solution tables. And even though it's a little challenging for us to applaud you, I want you to know that everyone on this line should be, if they're not, but I'm certain they are, giving you the largest round of applause that could possibly occur because you deserve it. Thank you for your work. Next, I want to thank everyone and certainly all of our panelists that are here today. Really pleased to see one young man. I'm pleased to see all you all, but you know, when I see certain people, I see him sort of smiling a little bit. He knows I'm about to call him out. You know, the point is that when you have an opportunity to get together and engage, it's always great. But this young man is sort of special to me in a way because he actually grew up with my children, and I've known him practically his entire life. I know that he comes from a great family stock, great parents, and since I've known him, he's been nothing but responsible. Certainly since he's been an adult, he's been involved in the community. He's doing great work. I probably said enough is going to smile off the screen now, but Armand, I'm always going to point that out because one of our responsibilities is to continue to encourage people like you. And you also have a responsibility to bring youth and encourage them and set the examples as you've done. So anytime I get an opportunity to acknowledge that, I will. Mr. Armand Ballware. So I just like to speak briefly and start by saying, you know, a solution, of course, is the answer to a problem. And to that extent, City of Gary certainly has its, you know, challenges and issues or problems, if you will, like any other community. But what we've established here is an opportunity to bring a diverse group of people together to discuss those issues. I think it's easy, probably one of the easiest things that people could do is to point out what the problems are. But I think it takes creativity, certainly takes collaboration and commitment to get together, put aside our own political, personal, or whatever differences that exist, and start to work and come up with real solutions. And that's what these sessions have been about. And I believe to a great extent, we're on the path to doing so. Looking forward to 2021 and continuing to engage with all of you all and helping to solve some of the issues that exist, not only in the city, but it's important to look at this sort of in a more holistic way and include the county, our state, and certainly the country could use its share of guidance, if you will, and solutions, particularly of how to engage with each other in a meaningful, respectful manner. Today's table is going to talk about a wide variety of issues that surround around policing and racial injustices. And to that extent, I think that there will be very meaningful dialogue. So I call on everyone here to just sort of sit back and listen to the different perspectives and to definitely bring your input and your approaches or solutions that you feel will help us all advance. To that extent, I'm ready to begin with the program. And I believe that my next task, Burgess, correct me if I'm incorrect, is to acknowledge our very special moderator today, Scott Sloan. Scott's a gentleman. Yeah, Scott's a gentleman that I met in somewhere right around 1981 or 82. Scott, I know that gives our age away a little bit, but when you look as well as you do, I don't think that really matters a whole lot. So,
I'm just trying to stand in good company with you, Mayor.
Oh my goodness, thank you. So let me read a little bit about Scott, because just to introduce him and tell him or tell you about him, I think doesn't really do any justice to who he really is. And so here we are. Minister Scott Sloan is the business manager for Embassies of Christ Kingdom Ministries. He's a graduate of Purdue University, West Lafayette, in the engineering program. For nearly 2 decades, he has been the operations manager for the church. He's a property manager for its subsidiary, which is Diplomat Plaza. He's a facilitator of leadership development and hospitality training for staff and ministry teams, and an instructor of fitness, professional skills, and personal growth programs for the church. His diverse background includes process and strategic planning with General Motors, business systems analysis and development with Anderson Consulting. He's a corporate recruiter for a worldwide, is a corporate recruiter for worldwide financial institutions. He's involved in education, corporate training, personal executive coaching as a certified coach, speaker, trainer. He's also involved in human behavior through John Maxwell team, and the author of a best-selling book, Happy You Year. I love it. He also conducts workshops and training sessions, both in the U.S. and abroad. Mr. Sloan brings practical, real-world experience in a manner that captivates audiences and keeps them engaged. He uses humor and audience participation to drive home one of his core principles, which is the ability to deliver uniquely relevant topics. Scott, thank you. I enjoyed reading all of that, largely because I know it to be true. Thank you for joining us and being a part of this program, and we look forward to you moderating and introducing all of our panel guests.
Mayor, it's a pleasure to be here today. And before you all, I'm getting comments. Yes, I sleep between breaths. Yeah, I just take quick winks, wake up, and there I am. But I appreciate your acknowledgement, Mayor. Thank you so much for the introduction.
Pleasure's all mine. So I don't know if you all have agendas in front of you, but I believe I do. And the next section is to hear updates from certain personnel. We'll start with Joy Holliday, who actually runs the Gary for Life program. Joy, do you have any updates for the panel today? You're on mute.
There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone. I thank you, Mayor, for the introduction. I thank you, Burgess, always for thinking of me. And I thank the esteemed panel that I'm having the privilege of being a part of this morning. And I think as far as updates for us for the city, it has been a pleasure for me to serve right now as the chairman of the Gary Police Reform Commission that the mayor impaneled about a month ago. And so we are continuing on with our efforts. And right now we're specifically looking at how do we engage with individuals who may be suffering from a mental health crisis, as well as we're looking at the use of force policies and seeing ways in which we can improve upon that. And one thing that we are expressing is that we want to have the engagement of the community It is extremely important to have their voices heard and at the table. So we're making plans to really put together some small discussion tables around looking at these particular recommendations that we're going to offer to the mayor. And he's given us a 6-month charge to get that together. So we are definitely diligently working towards those goals. And I think that, especially in the climate that we're experiencing nationally, it is extremely important. And I appreciate the mayor's forethought to put together something like this before we experience anything catastrophic within the city. It is always important to be prepared. And so being out front and being ahead of the game, I think will definitely bode well with us as a city. So that is one of the updates that I have. We're continuing on with our efforts with Gary for Life. And again, that is the city's answer as an initiative to gun violence in the city. And what is so very important in that is that law enforcement is at the table with many of our organizations, such as Janae is a part of the Parenting Institute, a lot of organizations that are in Gary, and they are sharing the table with law enforcement in a way in which we can do more focused policing and not oversaturate our communities with law enforcement. So I think that Gary is definitely, we are in a unique position, and I am very humbled to have the opportunity to express those voices as well at many tables, either nationally as well as locally.
Ms. Holliday, thank you for your continued service to the city. Certainly, thank you for your professionalism and such a thorough update. We on behalf of the city, certainly appreciate all of your efforts, and thank you for what you're doing with the newly established Reform Commission as well. We have one more update. Thank you. We have one more update, and then I'm going to turn this program over to our very capable moderator, who I gave you a slight introduction for. But in any event, is Dr. Beverly Lewis with us. Dr. Beverly Lewis is from the House of Bread Ministries, and she'll give us an update on our previous Solutions Table. Dr. Lewis?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mayor. Thanks for the opportunity to serve. I have been the virtual facilitator for the solution tables that have met in October and September. The solution tables began meeting in July of 2020 face-to-face, and then we moved to a virtual format. Our idea is to create a slate to help address the issues that are in the region surrounding racism and police brutality. The format which we have used has been designated as the solution table, a place where persons can come and discuss and bring their ideas about how we can be change agents in our community and in our region. So we come together to discuss so we can prepare and propose solutions to implement change in Gary and the surrounding communities. And some of you who are with me today have also been at those virtual and in-person solution tables. To that end, we intend to continue engagement with our leaders on the local, regional, and state level. We intend to involve our community through education about current laws and policies that need to be changed for the safety and security of our city, our county, and our state. Additionally, we intend to hold elected officials accountable so that promises for change can be more than just campaign slogans. We understand that this work is massive. However, our goal is to tackle the mountain one mound at a time. We thank you for allowing us to serve.
Thank you, Dr. Beverly. And so I promised you all that I would bring Scott on so that you wouldn't have to hear me go on. But listen, one of the things that I always do as an elected official, and it's certainly out of respect, particularly because once you serve, you definitely have a greater insight as to what that means. And it doesn't make us special, but certainly makes us different to be certain. But I need to recognize who will be recognized by Scott again, but I definitely want to acknowledge the presence of another elected official, Munster Town Councilman Steve Tulowitzki. Did I pronounce it correctly, Steve?
Very good, Mayor Prince.
Awesome. Thank you.
I like to say, if you take away my wits, I'd be too low key.
Too low key. I like that. A guy with a sense of humor too. So thank you for joining us, Steve. Thanks for participating. But without further delay, let's bring up Minister Scott Sloan. Scott, it's all yours.
Again, Mayor, I thank you for the introduction, and I wouldn't be here if it were not for the awesome efforts and attention of Prophetess Burgess Peoples. She called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Want to moderate a panel discussion?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's go." But once she told me what the topic was, I was very excited, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. We've got so many people on board today, so I won't go any further. I'm just going to commence with the introductions. First and foremost on my list, I have Pastor Corey Jackson. Again, let's hear it for all of the military who are taking part of this call today. As it being Veterans Day, we want to say thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Pastor is the pastor of Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church in Gary, Indiana, and president of the Baptist Ministers Conference, Gary and Vicinity. Pastor Jackson has to lead the charge on several awareness campaigns: the Angry Enough to Vote, Souls to the Polls, Clergy Rally for Change on the Gary City Hall, and Police Reform Rally, Indianapolis, and Operations Outreach. Pastor Jackson, thank you for your participation and joining us on the call.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We have Dr. David Neville. He's the pastor of AME Zion Church, chancellor of Methodist Hospital, president of the Interfaith Clergy Council, Gary and Vicinity. Their mission of their church is to unite religious leaders in the area of spiritual fellowship with a special emphasis on social action. Dr. Neville, thank you for participating and being a part of this call today.
Just a little clarification. Yes, I'm the president of the Interfaith Clergy Council, but the church is Unity, AME Zion Church, that I'm the pastor of.
Very well. Thank you, sir, for the correction, and please forgive me for the error.
Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. And we have the superintendent, Douglas G. Carter, superintendent of the Indiana State Police. He's born and raised in LaPorte, Indiana. After graduating from LaPorte High School in 1980, went on to attend Ball State and was later accepted into the 42nd Indiana State Police Recruit School. He served 18 years with the Indiana State Police from November 84 until 2002, where he was assigned to the Pendleton State Police District while serving Hamilton County. In 2002, Superintendent Carter sought the elected official office of Sheriff of Hamilton County and ultimately served 2 terms from January 2003 through December 2010. Appointed by Governor Mike Pence, Superintendent Carter became Indiana's 20th superintendent of the state of police on January 14th, 2013, and was reappointed by Governor Eric Hogan on January 13th, 2017. Superintendent, we are so glad that you took time out of your day to be a part of this call.
Well, it's a pleasure. Boy, that sound is good.
That's okay.
Can you hang on just a second?
Okay, I think we're good. We have attorney Thomas Dockage, who is a practicing attorney for more than 30 years, and his practice is centered on developing telecommunication and data centers. He is a managing member of Digital Crossroads, where we're always looking for opportunities to transform distressed assets into state-of-the-art data centers and serve the foundation for the digital economy. Attorney Dockage, thank you for being on this call today. Okay, I got a thumbs up. We have Joy Holliday, who is the director of Gary for Life Initiative. The initiative works to reduce violence, change culture. The program has helped reduce the number of gang-related shootings and homicide in the past several years. Director Holliday works very, very cohesively with the Gary Police Department. We're so glad to have you on this call today.
Thank you.
We have Chief Brian Evans. I believe we have Chief Evans on the call. Well, he is the Chief of Police, and he has been an active member of the Gary Police Department for 26 years. Glad to have you on this call today, good sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The pleasure's ours. We have Janae Beletza. I'm getting a thumbs up. I got it right. Her passion for helping and serving others has driven her. She is IPI's Chief Operating Officer, and what motivates her is the vision for thriving families throughout Indiana. She serves on several state and local boards and committees, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission, Chairman, Governor's Workforce Cabinet, Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and the Lake Area United Way Jobs Working Group. Thank you so much, Janae, for being on the call today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We have Pastor Michael Proto. He is the pastor of Gary City of Refuge Church and the Northwest Indiana Executive Director for Emma's House. Pastor of the church, pastor of the City of Refuge. He has, sorry, my screen went out for a moment. The Emma House, it's a single woman's house which helps single women transfer from prison and addiction. The church has been helping women who have nowhere else to turn. Their vision is that it's not just a church within these four walls of the building, but it's the church in the community meeting needs. Pastor Michael, we're so glad to have you on this call today.
Thank you.
We have Councilman Steve Tolowitzki, the fourth Town Council Ward, for the fourth Town Council Ward in Munster, Indiana. He believes ending the silence is the only way to end the violence. Ending silence is long overdue. He stands for racial and social injustice in his community. He stands for social justice in his workplace, and he stands for social justice in his network across the world. He's the youngest member of the Munster, Indiana Town Council to serve in a role for more than 20 years. I could go on, but we want to thank you for your time and service and participation in this call today.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Scott.
We have Dr. Beverly Lewis. She is pastor of House of Bread Ministries. She is a Gary minister. Her passion, social action. She says vision is in the bread. She is a conduit for change and unity. She is an executive board member of the Gary Faith Leaders and Community Partnerships over Education. You've seen her, you love her. Dr. Beverly, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We have Dr. Ramin Jackson. He is pastor of St. Timothy Community Church. Reverend Jackson, he's anointed, uniquely gifted, powerful preacher, teacher of God's word. He is a leader dedicated to the work of Christ Jesus. Born and raised in East End of Long Island, New York. He attended the Riverhead schools and graduated with his Regents diploma. Dr. Jackson furthered his education by attending the SUNY Old Westbury University in Westbury, New York. He has demonstrated over the years faithful service in working with youth, mentoring young men, helping the poor, and giving back to the community. He uses his gifts as a preacher, as a teacher, singing, worship, praise leader, to the glory of God. Dr. Jackson, thank you for being on the call today.
He's not with us today. He's
not with us. Yeah. Oh, so sorry to hear. And then we have Mr. Michael Gonzalez, Director of Communications for the City of Gary. Thank you for participating. And of course, we have Prophetess Burgess J. Peoples, who is the Chief Strategist and the President of the Gary Faith Leaders and Community Participation Organization. We thank you again for heading this vision. Did I miss anyone from the call today? And if so, please, we're going to open it up so that you can announce yourself.
You missed me. I don't think I'll be able to introduce myself as eloquently as you and Mayor Prince have, everyone else. But my name is Armand Boulware. I am a real estate broker with Caldwell Banker in Indiana, Illinois. I'm a native of Gary, Indiana. And like Mayor Prince, I grew up with his children. I am solely vested in the progress of our community, the progress of the city of Gary. And also I'm grateful to be able to be a part of this panel. Burgess brings me into every panel that I can be a part of because she says it works for my greater goal. So I'm appreciative to be here. I'm grateful for all of our veterans on a day like today. We definitely give special thanks to them. And yeah, Mr. Sloan, I guess I couldn't do it as eloquently as you, but that's the best I have today.
You know what? The best you have is all we need today, Mr. Bulwer. We thank you for being on the call today. And I see a Laura Smith Wynn. Is she muted?
It appears that she's muted. Ms. Wynn, are you able to unmute yourself and say hello to everyone?
Well, I'm not, if she
You know
jumps
what?
in. Oh, there she
Hi, no, this is Janae. That is the CEO of Indiana Parenting Institute, and she wanted to watch the discussion today, and I think she hit the wrong link. So we'll just let her watch it.
Okay.
And but she's not a part of the panel.
Gotcha.
She may chime in, but I just wanted to let you understand that.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and continue the call, and we think we're grateful that she could participate. Lord gave me a scripture today. He said, Micah 6:8, he has shown you, oh man, what is good. He's shown it to you. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love kindness and mercy, and to humble yourself and walk humbly with your God. We're entering into a conversation today. And the first thing I want to lead off with is everybody is familiar with those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that George Floyd was seen, and we watched him perish and leave the earth. Let me ask this question, and I'm going to start off with addressing our professionals in law enforcement first, and then we'll proceed to the rest of the group. In the wake of the death of George Floyd, what changes have, or how has the police department changed? Superintendent, I'd like you to be the first to speak on that. In the wake of what's taken place, how has the police department changed?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge that this issue exists and the problem exists that has existed for decades. And secondly, secondly, that my profession owns some of this distrust. And we could spend a lot of time talking about why, but I think it goes back a couple, 3 decades. And we have a great opportunity right now, in large part because of what happened to George Floyd, to reset. And I'm all in. I am all in. The time for us to review those things that we do, particularly the way in which we interact with other human beings, is now. I've come to realize, though, that our success likely will come when all of us are long gone. But now is the time to build that foundation so that the next generation after us doesn't have to address this very same issue. I heard earlier, I think from Mayor Prince, that accountability lies with elected officials, and accountability also lies with people like me. As the head of a very large police organization in Indiana, you should hold me accountable. And I work tirelessly to be as transparent as I can possibly be, and I'm willing to have uncomfortable conversations. As I sit here with one of our best to my right side, he'll know what I'm going to say, what I'm about to say, and that I have a lot of work to do internally within the ISP with the way in which we treat people who don't look like me. And it's very hurtful to me. It's very, very hurtful to me to have learned the way people have been treated over the course of years. And that certainly extends out into the general public. So I think, again, we have to acknowledge the issue. We have to have uncomfortable conversations, and accountability must be absolutely everywhere. I think what we have to do, though, is stop the rhetoric. We have to stop coming to a conclusion based on what we think and wait until we know, and understand that takes time, even in this complicated world of social media and the way in which we interact with each other. So I believe that now is the time. I'm not the one that's going to stand at a podium and just simply agree, but I'm also willing to sit anywhere with anybody at any time and talk about meaningful steps that we can take so that, again, your kids and grandkids and those that come after don't have to do what you've done with yours. So I guess that's a very high level overview. But again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm all in, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Gary to talk about these very issues. And I wish we could all be at a great big table look at each other face to face. I hope one day we can do that.
Superintendent, I appreciate that. I'm going to go to Police Chief Brian Evans, but you touched on something that I hope we come back to later, and that is, how did we get here? At least from law enforcement's perspective. We'll come back to that. Chief Evans, same question. In the wake of the death of George Floyd, in your perspective, in your observation, what has changed with the police department? Okay, I saw him a moment ago.
I think he's frozen.
Okay, I think he is too. Let's open it up. If he joins us, then we'll come back to him. But from a civilian standpoint, let's start with you. Let's go to you, Attorney Dockage. Your perspective from an attorney from law enforcement standpoint. How have you noticed the police department changing in this climate?
So first of all, thanks, Burge, for including me. I stand in awe of you. You build coalitions like nobody else. Secondly, thanks to the vets. We're not here, but for you guys. I'm not a vet, but I literally stand in awe of what you guys do. So elections have consequences, and we just finished one that was very divisive. And it was, we're going to have 150 million people vote in the presidential election. That is a great thing. Police and Superintendent Carter, I don't know that we've ever met. Maybe we have, but your words start us out in a whole different way by saying stop the rhetoric. We just finished an election that was all about rhetoric, and by focusing on the stop the rhetoric, I got chills when you said it, to be honest, because we're going the wrong way in this stuff. So, I mean, I can create IT jobs and I can do all that, which is wonderful. But elections, the consequences of elections have been felt for the last 4 years, and it needs to. And the fact that 150 million people voted this time really excites the entire concept of democracy, because at the end of the day, it's just a concept.
Gotcha. I understand. At this point, I want to ask the same question, but I want to ask it differently to the civilians. I asked law enforcement, how has the police department changed? What I want to ask those who are not in law enforcement, what are the changes that you feel need to be made? And I'm just going to go around, starting at the top and working my way around to Councilman Tulowitzki. What changes do you see? What changes do you believe need to be made in the police department?
Well, thanks for the question. I really appreciate what Attorney Dockage said about the rhetoric. And I was just thinking, what's the opposite of rhetoric? And to me, that's authentic, courageous, sometimes uncomfortable communication. I got chills when you came back saying that I said it's time to end the silence, because that's what leads to the violence. So in Munster, I had several concerned citizens reach out to me, ask questions about the police department. We had an executive session to review some policies. Our department is CALIA certified. It's the Commission for Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, which helps keep us at the edge of having the right policies, no chokeholds, all of the things that we're talking about. So, but I think we need to talk more openly. We had that session sort of internally, and it's my hope that we have that conversation externally within our community and across our communities, not just in Munster, but that's why I'm so honored to be here with so many people from the town of Gary, or the city of Gary. I think that's what it starts with, is being willing to be uncomfortable and saying things that we haven't said maybe all our lives.
Okay, thank you. Joy, I'd like you to speak to that. What changes do you see that you work very closely with them? What changes do you see that need to be made?
I think that the changes happens. It happens in cycles, and I think they continue training. There can never be enough training when it comes to law enforcement, and something that I think that we can always improve on is transparency. A lot of times, and it is not just with law enforcement, it's also with community members. That line of communication goes back and forth. And I think that the community needs to hear from law enforcement. Let's talk about the tactics that are used, what situations they are used in, what are their rights. And I also think that law enforcement needs to hear from the community in which they impact. What does how does your policies affect them? What are some of the experiences that they have encountered? And I think that it will be that line of communication that will cut down on all of the rhetoric, or at least on most of it, we hope. We hope that we will be able to come to the table and come to the center where everyone can start to understand each other and understand law enforcement and the reasons in which they may take particular tactics. But I think that law enforcement definitely should be just as willing to hear, again, from the community and the different experiences that they've also encountered.
Okay. Dr. Neville.
Thank you again for the question. I think there needs to be more screening in terms of police officers and those in law enforcement, those that come into law enforcement on the front end. But then even after the screening and after persons are on the force and involved, the training is important, but also communication, getting to know each other, and then also the accountability of those in law enforcement when issues do arise or when persons are not performing within the policies or the guidelines that have been established.
Yeah, you brought up accountability. In your estimation, who is the accountability partner to the situations like that?
Well, I think everyone. I mean, I think there's an accountability that goes each way. So if we want to talk from the law, the police department and the officers, the city, the town, the state, those that live in the community, the elected officials, the town council members or the city officials, depending on how the community is structured. But I think everyone needs to be a part of that. I include the faith-based community needs to be a part of that, the Chamber of Commerce and the business persons. It really takes everyone as a stakeholder to be involved in order to really improve the situation wherever we live and wherever we're working and serving.
Thank you very much. Pastor Proto, changes in the police department.
Well, you know what, I can give you my opinion. I haven't worked within the police department or anything, but I'm also a former Marine, born on Parris Island. And I can only tell you that I would hope that just like Marine Corps training in combat town and different pressure type of situations, that the level of training, as Joy was saying, the level of training has been, amped up. I was a crisis prevention instructor, and so just de-escalation tactics, I would hope that remains important. And something else I also think is that, we look at our police officers, but we also need to consider that some of them may actually have untreated PTSD and those type of things. And so continued psychological evaluations and assessment of our officers, especially after they're coming out of some type of engagement that could be impacting them. And so instead of assuming that they're okay, there need to be continued assessments that they are okay, so that fight to flight syndrome are not setting in based off of psychological issues that they may be going through. And so instead of funding police, I think they need increased funding for training and getting them the care that they need as well.
Appreciate that. Mr. Boulware, want to hear your perspective.
Well, I'll be remiss to make any recommendations on what the police department should be doing, but what I have heard, and I would like to bring to the forefront of the discussion, is Superintendent Carter spoke about the human interaction, and at least 5 times someone's mentioned accountability. And then, to think about the interactions between police and the typical young Black men in our communities that these incidents have occurred with, I think about the environment of that interaction, and from, an ignorant law enforcement perspective, I'm of the idea that they're probably encountering all of these people in a very hostile environment, and almost an environment of warfare. When you're dressed with ballistic vests and, several firearms and all of these things that are made to be lethal weapons, when you interact with someone under that type of preparation, then the stakes are high. The stakes are very high. And the stakes and these experiences are so organic. How do you train for such an organic experience? I think that's something that if someone had one finite answer to, it'll solve everyone's problem. So instead of planning for that hostile interaction, how do we de-escalate the environment for meeting that citizen and meeting in these communities? When we talk about like the police reform committees, and I know Joy speaks a lot about community engagement, how do we create that environment? How do we create a different citizen's experience with the police? How can we effectively do that? I mean, that's a huge question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Janae, I'd like to hear your perspective.
Wow, I've been taking notes on what everyone's been talking about, and because I was going to say one thing and then somebody says something and something else comes up. So I did, based upon what Armand was speaking about, one thing that I hope I said your name right, by the way.
Perfect.
Awesome. So one of the conversations I have had recently with someone that I do want to actually bring to this conversation is about understanding relationships, right? In business, for example, the employee has a specific type of conduct that is expected with their employer, right? And so we are supposed to be taught these in, I would say, post-secondary, so that when we go into the work world that we know how to interact. I'm realizing that luxury has never been afforded most kids in the urban communities of what the relationship between a citizen and an officer is supposed to look like, because there is a supposed relationship there. So to understand what you are to expect from an officer and what an officer is expecting from you, I think is a good entryway into knowing how to approach that officer, and then also knowing when they are not behaving as they should, and then knowing what to do when they are not behaving as they should, as opposed to getting defiant. Again, put yourself in.
Let me ask you a question. I think that's a great point. Where do those conversations take place? Are we expecting them to come from the home? Are we expecting them to be taught in school? From your vantage point, where do those conversations begin?
Gosh, I believe it used to be taught in the home. I just think that there's several things that impact that. You've got working parents. I work a full-time job. When I get home, I don't have kids. But when I get home, I can't even imagine having to have the focus and the energy to give to my child after I've given so much to my job. So I think that you'll find that in two parent working homes that it's the time and energy to give to that is not really there. So the community, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, is going to have to take more of a role. It takes a village, right? The community needs to start acting more like a village as opposed to a bunch of individuals who all live in the same space. And so I think when that happens, then nonprofits, we're out here for a reason, that could become our role. We need to work together as I say this a lot, Burgess will tell you I drive her crazy with this, but we really need to start operating as a system. We need to stop operating as these isolated opportunities and realize that when we come together and create an assembly line, so to speak, that you start here one way and you end up and you leave the assembly line another way, I think that we'll start seeing much more productivity as opposed to these spot solutions to things.
Thank you so much. Dr. Beverly Lewis, love to hear your perspective. What changes should we impose, should we expect to see the police department make in this climate?
Well, listening to all of my illustrious colleagues here, 3 words come to mind. One is assessment, the other is accountability, the other is availability. Assessment being when I hear Dr. Reverend Neville talk about screening. Availability when I hear Pastor Proto talk about checking out the police officers after they've had an organic engagement, like Armand says. and then accountability, which we've heard several times. So I think it'll be a multi-leveled approach in order for us to see the typical or to see changes that will actually affect our environment. I'm in agreement with Janae when she says, you know, that used to come from home. And I think about my daughters who are now adults and the types of lessons and stories that I would tell them so that they would be prepared. I have one daughter who lives between Chicago and here, and every time she leaves my home, going back to the city in Chicago, she says she's been pulled over by the police. And so every time she leaves, there's a concern on my part because I don't know, will she end up as some of our nameless African-American female women that have also been murdered at the hands of police? And so I think we'll need to saturate all of our systems and all of our bodies of politics where we move as far as professional and religion and home-based to work together as to build a system in which we can eradicate this problem.
Okay. Appreciate that perspective. Dr. Jackson, I've been watching your body language. I couldn't wait to get to you. Let me hear your perspective on changes that we should expect, that we should look to see in the police department.
Well, I totally agree with everything that has been said. We do need training, the screening. But there's two things that kind of comes to my mind though. Typically, particularly being leaving the service at one point in time, we think it's perceived that the best police officers are those who are exiting the military. And by doing so, a lot of times that as they're exiting, they come to those police departments, they are carrying a military mindset, which unfortunately does not always work well in a civilian environment. Particularly those who may have been leaving the combat area. So I think that we need to start looking at a period of decompression, particularly for those who come into are leaving the military and going to police force. The second thing is, I think that's important is that we are in need of a desperate reintroduction. And what I mean by that is that we've had some things that made national headlines. And so now we look at the police, and you know what we do to change the environment, the climate, and the circumstances. And I don't think, and we're missing the reintroduction of the police department into our communities. One of the things that I remember growing up at Williams School in Gary was we used to have Officer Friendly. Officer Friendly would come into the schools and we met, I can't call his name now, but we would meet them and as little kids in elementary school. And so as we grew up and grew older and got out in the streets and doing different things, we had a awareness and a relationship already built with certain police officers. Now, I think that's where we're missing now, that we're hiring police officers and bringing them in, and then we're saying, here, go. Whereas there has to be an introduction to the citizens and those neighborhoods in which they're patrolling so that the children and those who are affected know them. I should not only be speaking to the police officer when there's an issue. I should be able to see them right past and say, hey, Mike, hey, so-and-so, hey, so-and-so, because we have been introduced. And now you begin to learn my character, I begin to learn your character, and then we don't never have to worry about a clash of characters.
Awesome, awesome.
Can I jump in here?
Please do.
So when I was growing up, my father was the principal at Calumet High School, and Officer Friendly was a celebrity, at least in our world he was. And it was a great interface. And it's kind of I don't know, Superintendent Carter, but it's kind of maybe quasi old fashioned or something, but he was a big deal. And so maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. From personal experience, when I was growing up in Chicago, I lived next door to a police officer. So I saw him as a human being. I saw him as a real life person. We had the Officer Friendlies come into the school and kind of rub elbow to elbow. But the question I'm going to pose to everybody, how do we change the perception? Let me define what I mean by that. I was stopped. I was driving to an engagement at Purdue, and I was dressed in a suit and tie, and I was going faster than the law might allow, and I got pulled over. So the officer came up. My head went to lock your hands on the steering wheel. Now, this is about 6 years ago. I'm a grown man. Lock your hands on the steering wheel and don't make any quick movements. He said, let me see your driver's license and registration. I pull out my driver's license and it fell between the seat. I'm like, oh my God. My mind like, I don't want to get shot today. He looks at me and I look at him. I'm like, like speaking slowly was going to make it better. I am going to get my driver's license from between the seat. He just laughs. He's like, man, you're good. I see what's going on. But how do we change our perspective from a community perspective that I'm a black man, I'm going to get shot by the police today, or the probability of that is high. On the flip side, from the law enforcement perspective, if I was not dressed in a suit and tie, if I had on a skull cap and the music was blaring, now I could be the CEO of a company. I could have been that same Scott Sloan in the car, just dressed differently. My question, how do we educate both sides to the perception that, what I see isn't necessarily what it is?
Hey, Scott, before you begin selecting persons to answer that, I see that Chief Evans appears to have been able to resolve his technical difficulties. If you'd allow him an opportunity to chime in perhaps on the last question a little bit,
Absolutely.
as well as morph into this one, I think that'd be great. Chief Evans, are you there?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Hey,
Yes, sir.
yes, we can, Chief Evans. And the question that was posed to the professionals in law enforcement is, in the wake of what took place with George Floyd, what changes, how has the police department changed?
I heard the question, and let me first apologize. I was actually on my computer and it went dead. And my IT person at home is my 16-year-old daughter, who is in school right now by Zoom. So I've had to find out how to get on the phone without my IT professional, who was Courtney, my 16-year-old daughter. So I apologize. I heard everything actually when I got back on, and I'm glad actually I came on at this particular time, because I heard about 8 things that are really hit home on the question that you asked. So in reference to the tragic death of George Floyd, which I've heard no one in law enforcement in any type of way try to defend, try to define. That simply is not anything that any of us have ever been trained to do or want to do if you're any reasonable person. But with the Gary Police Department, which is a police department that I can speak about the most, is that this process to try to give our citizens a voice began about 5 or 6 years ago when we started doing our PJ training and our judicial prejudice training through the national initiative. The George Floyd was the result of a culmination of things that have gone on in our society, which is the perceptions that people have with one another. I'm going to start with one of the last things that you said about how a person perceives you with the way you're dressed. And you put that on law enforcement, which is what you're concerned with, because if you get stopped, it's important that you're not perceived in such a way. And that goes back to that first question about what happened to Mr. Floyd and all the other people that have had interactions with police officers. And what I mean by that, the way you are perceived as a black man, as I am as a black man, as my 2 adult sons who travel around this community in Porter County, LaPorte County, is a result of society. Society has treated African-American men like spiders. And what I mean by that is when you see a spider, there are only 2 reactions you have to it. Either you want to get away from it or you want to kill it. If you turn on your TV tonight and you turn to 2579, whatever news media you watch, I guarantee you the first 10 minutes are going to be tragic incidents committed by black men, as if they're the only ones in those communities that have committed crimes or whatever it is. And that has skewed the perception, I believe, my personal belief, of society over the what black men and black people are. So how do you change that aspect, and how as the police department responded to it? We instituted judicial prejudice training within the police department that is mandatory for all officers that were on the department and that come on the department now and forevermore. That training is trained by Gary police officers who actually now train at our local police academy and train everyone in the region. The accountability that was spoken about is definitely important. And it is a responsibility of everybody. the police officers, the supervisors, and the citizens, oftentimes we want to take actions on behavior because discipline should be about tracking the behavior of a person and changing the person's behavior. And small things can add up to big things. And sometimes the hurdles we face is getting citizens to trust us with the complaints. We just had a situation in Gary where two of our officers came forward. Well, one of our officers and outside officers came forward on a police officer that they believe did something very disturbing, and we terminated that officer. And what I'm saying about that is an unusual situation and must become more common. And the bravery of those officers to stand up against what I know everyone here believes is a system that wouldn't allow them to do that allowed us to use their testimony who was there to get rid of a person or individual who we thought was serving our citizens right. I heard about PTSD, and that is also something that is very, very important. So what we do in the Gary Police Department after a critical incident, we do a mandatory reset of a person by sending them to a professional to try to gauge where they are, and that person or individual officer can go through that process for as long as they need. And we support them by not having them come to work at any time, by letting them go through the process. So a lot of things have happened with training, with screening, as I heard that was one of the things that was said. And that's a process that is very, very complex, and that's something that we can get into in a conversation that we can talk about screening, but there's no screening for racism. There's no screening for bad behavior. You have to deal with it when it occurs. Military service, I heard that also. That's something that, you look at the officers that we have, not even 50% of our officers are prior military at this point. We're getting officers from all over and all walks of life. So I'm going to jump off right now because my daddy was a pastor. I say this all the time. If you let me talk, Minister, I will keep talking and I'll take up an offering. So I'll take questions from here as needed.
We'll come back to questions. I think it's important to identify something that you just said. For some reason, this George Floyd incident brought national and international attention, but this is not new. I remember when I was at Purdue, 3 friends of mine were walking out of a village pantry, which is the equivalent of a 7-Eleven. We've got snacks, we're laughing, we're walking, we're strolling. Seconds later, 2 police officers, sirens blaring, rose up, guns pulled, and they looked at us and they said, well, where are you guys coming from? It's like, we're 10 steps outside of the store with snacks in hand. We're visible. The store owner's visible. He's serving other people. And I'm like, we just came out the store. Show us your IDs. Like, don't question. We show them our IDs. And after that, we ask, what is the problem? It said, well, 3 males were identified as robbing a store. And we said, you see us drinking snacks, eating snacks, walking out of the store. You're looking, you can see the store owner is in no peril. How can you come with such rage and such violence against us? How do we screen for people who think that you have a tail growing from behind you? My best friend went to Purdue, and I thought he was kidding. He said, this guy was in the shower looking at me. I didn't know if he was strange or awful or whatever. But I asked him, what are you looking at? He said, I was told by my parents, by my grandparents, that you people have tails. How do you screen against that? How do you screen? I'm looking at the faces and you're like, that's incredible. That can't be, but it was. These incidents aren't new. People have been getting choked out. How do you screen against those perceptions? What do we do? Superintendent, I see I'd like to hear your pulse on that. You're muted.
Technology is not my strong suit. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, first of all, I'm offended. And to hear those kinds of stories about police interactions bother me deeply. They really, truly do. I've taken a couple of notes here too, like Janae did. And I really want to take just a minute, Mr. Sloan. I think I can maybe get to your answer. De-escalation techniques and tactics are absolutely appropriate. We are not good at them. We are not good at them. We recognize since all of this began from May 25th on, that not Not only do we have to address de-escalation techniques, but we have to change the way we teach. All of us that are on this call today learned historically differently than young people do today. I learned in an academic setting. I still wasn't very good at it, but I learned in an academic setting through a test, through listening to a professor, and then we would take a test and we pass it and we move on. The generation today doesn't do that. They don't communicate the way we do. The law enforcement never really recognized that. We have to build our training around scenario basis. The scenarios that we know will happen. It could be that scenario that you just explained coming out of the village pantry. And by the way, I remember village pantries specifically at Purdue. Those are the kinds of scenarios we have to give to this newer generation. Not being critical of them, God bless them all. But we're doing them a disservice by expecting them to learn the way we did when we know that's not the case. Number one, we are all expected to be superhuman. We're not. We're human beings, just like everybody else. But the difference is we deal with death, dying, destruction, hurt, pain, and sorrow every single day. I don't know who said it. This seems very disrespectful, but somebody talked about the mindset of police officers today. And Chief, I know you're still on the line. For what you're doing with your officers in critical incidents is awesome. And it's absolutely the right thing to do. We are human beings. We are human beings. Remember that we go to the issue. We don't cause the issue. We go to the issue. And one of the things that's been very much in the forefront today is criticism about use of force. And I'm saying there's plenty of room for criticism. I'm not saying there's not. But if you have never been in a physical altercation with another human being, or never been in a deadly force encounter, and I've been in both, please be careful with how you categorize them and with what your opinion might be. You can't teach it. You can teach the response to it. But the action and reaction are very, very different. We know what happens to the human body and the brain when tremendous dumps of adrenaline are suddenly pumped into the system. We know what will happen. I'd be very, very cautious, though, please, about those kinds of issues. I'm not saying we don't need some significant work. We do. But just because an officer was involved in a deadly force encounter does not make him or her a bad person. Again, I heard the organic situations. I think Mr. Bowler, I think that, well, I'm not sure who it came from. So
yeah, that was me.
Again, the training environment has to change. Mayor, I'm going to throw you out on Front Street here. But if we don't start equipping and training our officers to meet today in almost 2021, we're doing a disservice to every community in America. Every single community in America. We're expecting these officers to do what they've always been trained to do when we all expect a different outcome, but we're not training them any differently. We're not equipping them any differently. It could be with body cams. It could be with in-car cameras, whatever that might be. I was opposed to body cameras for a long time, but I realize now those frontline officers feel like they have to have them now because their word doesn't matter, and that hurts me deeply. It hurts me deeply, but it's the reality of today. So as a state police entity, we're moving forward with those cameras. It's going to cost about $18 million, and it's ongoing. Once we're in, we can't pull back out. It's a huge commitment. And Steve, I see you nodding your head because you're the fiscal guy that's going to have to make that happen. So once you do this, you can't go back in time. I love the word imagine, and I promise I'm going to shut up. My dad was not a pastor, but I got a lot of information to get through just very, very quickly. I love the word imagine, and reset. Sometimes we've got to look in the rearview mirror and say, you know, we can't change what happened before. And I hope everybody's willing to do that. If we don't, we will never heal. We must take off our black gloves, our black sunglasses, and our tinted windows in our cars and engage with people that see us. The vast majority of people that see a law enforcement officer never deal with him or her. That all came almost 30 years ago. You all remember this. in South Central Los Angeles. That was the first time in my lifetime there was a significant racial incident that had a direct effect on me. I'll never forget that period of time. Fast forward to 1994, O.J. Simpson. Again, it reverberated all the way across the country. Now remember, we didn't have the internet then. We didn't have access to 24/7 news. It had profound effect. And what did people like me do? We built these walls around ourselves. And we stopped communicating with our communities because you're not going to criticize us. Who do you think you are to criticize us? We can't let history repeat itself again. In this period of time, people dressed funny like me cannot allow ourselves to build a wall. We have to have these kinds of conversations. And I applaud each and every one of you for allowing us to do that. Change in perception. You know, there's a hope that there's a magic bullet out there that we can all of a sudden change. We can't. The perception of policing changes one interaction at a time. There are 35 million interactions with law enforcement officers around this country annually. And imagine how many of them didn't have anything to do with policing. It was just simply being in your communities. I hate the word community policing. It's what we've done for a generation or two or three. My dad did it as a state trooper out of the Dunes Park Post here in northwestern Indiana. It's how I was raised. That's ridiculous. Community policing is what we've always done. We just haven't done it very well. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox and let people that matter talk. So thank you for the time. Scott, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share?
Yeah.
We'll take Dr. Neville, and then we'll go to Joy.
Just two things quickly. Much of what we've talked about, I think, would be helped both by experience and exposure. As we can give people various experiences, it makes a difference. As we provide exposure, we have better understanding and interactions, which also helps with communication, perceptions, understandings. And so experience and exposure, at least I wanted to lift those two up.
Okay, we're going to take Joy, Armand, and then I think I saw Pastor Jackson and Burgess. Oh, well, let's start with Burgess.
Or anyone else.
Or anyone else. Yeah. Now, I wanted to get to everyone who had a chance to speak, but they were kind of like, hey,
Okay.
It's me, Burgess.
All right, first I'd like to say thank you to everyone for your time, coming on, giving your ideas, your suggestions, and what you've actually gone through. We do have a lot of participant viewers. I want you guys to know that I am going to filter your questions to Superintendent Doug Carter, and we will answer you after the Zoom meeting. We have prolonged the time, so as Minister Scott said, and I thank you so much for moderating, you're doing an awesome job, that you guys get that 1 minute, not two, to give a little more insight so we can wrap things up so people can go on about their day, because I am grateful for your time, but I know your time is extremely valuable. Minister
Okay,
Scott.
Burgess, one more. What time are we ending today?
Well, we were supposed to end at 12, but, but this is so good that we went a little over. So let's let everyone have that last say, because we still have viewers, and viewers are still coming on watching. And we're gonna have this also on the mayor's page, YouTube channel on tomorrow. But right now, our live viewers are participating. Actually, I have a slew of questions that I'll be sharing with Superintendent Carter. So because they're all geared toward police and what they want him to, what they want to hear from him. So that's why I'm not just going to go and just read all of these. So let's get you back on, Minister Scott, so you can let everyone else have like that 1 minute that they can share something so we can keep moving forward.
Okay. We're going to give you, since we're overdue, we're going to allow everyone to speak to this. And then I've got another question I'd like to pose to the floor so that we can wrap up. Where'd I go? Joy.
Yes, and so now I have a challenge, 1 minute starting now.
Yes.
And one of the points that a lot of our panel has spoken about is, what do we do in order to create those organic experiences? And I have had some experience speaking to the youth in our community. Very graciously, the City Life Center allowed me, and this was through my role as the site liaison, for training with the national initiative that Chief Evans spoke of with the Gary Police Department in training officers in procedural justice. And one of the first things we needed to do was to get an understanding of how does the community view law enforcement. All of us in our perspective or respective fields can speak on what it is that we believe youth may want or what we believe youth may have issues with. And I wanted to have a chance to actually hear from them. And so it took a while for me to build their trust in me. And I would just come and, after they would have a basketball open gym, and then I would go in and I would just talk to them. And we would talk about various topics. And so finally we did come around to law enforcement. And what I did understand, and something that Armand brought up is that it wasn't necessarily the gear that officers wore that our youth had a problem with. But that's something that we're taught theoretically, we're taught academically, that actually intimidates them. But the youth didn't speak to that. The youth that were there, they spoke about canines, right? And so all of us here, we may know historically what the context is behind dogs and African Americans, but our youth had also picked up on that same context. If it's through the parent. Yes,
and I appreciate you, and I wish we had more time, but I'm keeping honest with my director here, Armand.
Yep. All right. So how do we reintroduce the human being and that human interaction? I think we start through the children. So the PAL programs, which I remember from my youth, was the Police Athletic League. I think Joy even mentioned in her brief statement. She got to this point at an open gym, right? Gary just recently had one of the largest street ball gatherings in the country this summer. Totally peaceful, no police presence. A police presence in a community standpoint, from a community standpoint, with the support of the city and with the proper COVID precautions as well, I think would make a huge impact. Maybe that's something, maybe that's a tomorrow solution, something we can do right away, because everything else, I think the interactions that have been ingrained into myself at 35 and some of the older gentlemen and other people that are, past that age of impressionability, I think we start back with the children. You reach the parents through the children, and that's how we reestablish that relationship.
Thank you so much, Armand.
Yeah,
I appreciate your response. Pastor Corey.
Well, one thing is I think we have to combat the perceived perception on both sides, how police officers view the citizen, but as well as how the citizen view police officers. And oftentimes we speak of the negative interaction so much that we begin to taint the thinking of people who have never had a bad interaction. I'm 43. I can say I, thank God, have never had a bad interaction with a police officer. And if you look at my driver's record, you would know I've had many interactions with police officers. But we have to start talking about and saying there are good police officers. There are police officers who are doing their job. We have to change the perception of allowing those who are not doing what they're supposed to get all of the attention. And until we begin to change their perception and their approach, we are going to develop children who are going to think, oh, all police officers are bad. And that is not the case. And when they think that, they're going to approach those police officers as if what? They're bad. And what the police officers are going to do? They're going to respond based off how they're approaching. We have got to change the overall perception on both parts.
I appreciate that. And I want to share something I saw in a police station once. And there was a banner that said, you wouldn't put your life on the line for $1 million. And we do it for a whole lot less. And that struck a chord with me today and going forth. Anyone else like to respond to the question? Steve.
Yeah, I've really loved some things I heard today. Chief Evans, what you said about being trained to treat Black men like spiders. It took me a minute to recover from that, and the truth of that statement. It's heartbreaking. And so this is all about a change in mindset, change in perception. I know I was just elected last year. I went from being someone who's driving my car and I see a police officer and I say, oh man, I might get a ticket. I got to behave. But now I recognize we're on the same team. I wave to the police officer and it makes a change in me. So I think that is really that really struck me. We got to talk about things like that. Also, words matter. I was just thinking, when you go to Walmart, there's a greeter. They say, "Welcome to Walmart." You know, how can we change the thing that you say as a matter of habit when you have your first encounter with someone that already de-escalates? That seems like a simple thing we can do. And we do over here, we do like donut with a cop. You know, there are opportunities to go and meet people. We have Officer Friendly. My daughter Lana, you know, they know Officer Friendly. I'd love to see us do that across communities. You know, a place where we got Gary, Munster, Griffith, Hammond, East Chicago, all the cops together. We do it for the fire, you know, fire trucks show up in the parade, but how can we get to know our communities at the intersections? Those are some things that came up for me.
Steve, you said something very critical, and it's something that I don't think I have to reiterate for people of color, but for those that are not, you said when you come and you see those flashing lights behind you, I don't want to get a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
That's your perspective. When I come, I don't want to go to jail and I don't want to get shot. That's the perspective of many African American men, and I think that fear factor on both sides has escalated to such a point where nobody knows how to respond anymore. Anyway, anyone else like to respond?
I'd like to say something, if I may. It's this simple. The thing about America, unfortunately, is that we've grown into it. We're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. We're really guilty until proven innocent. And that's how we enter into most of our relationships. And I think we need to go back to innocent until proven guilty. Prove to me that you're a person that I should be afraid of or that I should stay away from. Not let me assume that and then put the burden of proof on you to show me otherwise.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we can't have a relationship if everybody's spending their time defending themselves.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. But I think it goes to what Pastor Corey and several others have said. And as ministry leaders, it's a part. My father told me, how you look is how you'll be perceived, whether you say or before you even open up your mouth. So he always instructed how to walk out the house, how to present yourself. I don't want to hear that music blaring out your car. I think though that kind of training is imperative that we place back as ministry leaders, as educators, to put back in the system where it is not strictly the police officer's fault, but we have a response to bear too. Now, the last question I want to enter with, because I see we got about 6-7 minutes left, and it's a very brief one. You know, the question that I was presented to ask is, how is racism being addressed? I'm the kind of guy I believe was seeing the end in mind and working backwards. Can any of us honestly say in our lifetimes that we expect to see racism eradicated? I want to hear from you. I'm seeing head shakes.
I'll
seeing
jump
the
in.
head shake.
Look,
Please, Dr. Neville, please speak to that.
I don't think you do. You know, I think racism is just a human nature, and it's really a defense mechanism. The only way you combat that is by becoming more familiar with your neighbors and more familiar with people of the opposite race. You know, I came out of a predominantly Black city where I maybe only had 2 or 3 classmates that weren't Black or of minority race, and then I went to a predominantly white university. Right. And so some of my classmates, some of my football teammates there, they had never interacted with a Black guy before.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't until, you know, we're into the season, we've gone through training camp and things like that, similar to the training police academies, where you can make some of these close interactions and close relationships. But I think to think we eradicate racism will be far-fetched. But we can, you know, make people more familiar and a little bit more comfortable with those of the opposite of other races, though.
And if I can answer that as well, Sloan.
Please.
Yes, and to really piggyback off of that, no, I do not believe that you can eradicate racism, but it does go back to creating those organic situations as well as having those uncomfortable conversations. We have to become honest with one another. We have to talk about the misgivings that each of us may have on the particular sides of the table that we're coming from. And I think that all of us, you know, we all have titles that we're attached to. We all have organizations that we're attached to, but we need to humanize one another. And through the youth, I think it's a way that we can actually start in having those conversations as well, so that we can tap into the experiences that they're having, as well as reaching back further into those generations and connecting what has historically happened to us as African Americans. But again, it's going to happen on both sides of the table. It takes a communication from the community to law enforcement and from law enforcement to the community. And I think that we can see those relationships improve. Eradication, probably not, but we can definitely see a better treatment that we have towards each other as human beings.
Thank you, Joy. Steve.
I was just sitting here enjoying all this conversation. I don't think racism is going to end. The way I view it, and I don't think it's a left or right thing either. I view it as going up. I think this is about increasing consciousness within ourselves and amongst our communities. The more we know each other, we're familiar, and we're comfortable with each other because we had uncomfortable conversations and now become comfortable. I think it becomes less of the American story, and it becomes something that we got to deal with. I just want to share this. I always have these things. Empathy is what we're talking about. Empathy is feeling one person's pain or any emotion, as a matter of fact, in your own heart, in another's heart. And I think as we start to get familiar with each other, it becomes less of a problem when we have more empathy.
Thank you,
Can I
Steve.
throw in one thing? It'll be really quick, I swear. You know, it's really a matter of understanding that human beings categorize. We have to. So the reason I say it won't go away is because we categorize. That's how we survive. What we have to learn how to do is not place value upon those categorizations. The issue with the thing that makes an ism is because I'm saying that that thing is of less value than I am or that somebody else is. That's where we get into the isms. But the categorization component, yes, there are Black people. Yes, there are white people. Yes, there are Hispanic people. Yes, there are people with blonde hair. Yes, there are people with brunette hair, right? But at the end of the day, as long as I don't put a value or lesser value on one of those categorizations, then we won't have to worry about an ism. So it can't go away because we need it to survive.
Very good. Thank you for saying.
Scott,
Yeah, Superintendent, please.
Just a couple of minutes before we have to head out here. I hope the next time we can do this in person, we can spread out enough. I really hope we can do this in person. It'd be so much more meaningful. I'm all in with you. I believe that we can live in peace. I truly, truly believe that we can live in peace. And it's very difficult to hate up close. We have to have these conversations with each other. And you have no idea how much you've inspired me just to include me into this conversation. And finally, I sit here at Jay's Breakfast Club. That's the best egg sandwich I've ever eaten. So I've got to get a plug for them online.
Gotcha. I want to hear from Dr. Neville, Pastor Jackson, and Prophetess Burgess. Dr. Neville.
Yes, no, I don't think racism will end, but I do think that courageous conversations help, along with the experience and exposure. Dr. Beverly Lewis participated on Sunday in a courageous conversation that has started in the Valparaiso community. And so there are some that are taking those steps and having those conversations to be able to share stories and try to make improvements.
Thank you very much. Pastor Jackson.
Well, my immediate thought, my emotions say racism will always be here, but scripture tells me love conquers all things. And I believe that as we learn how to love ourselves and one another, that we have the ability to rid ourselves of having to deal with racism. Will it be in our lifetime? I doubt it, but I do believe it's possible we come back with love. And sometimes, and we've seen cases where love, the approaching of love has done that and changed different views from various people.
Thank you, Pastor. Prophetess.
I am not going to belabor this time any longer.
We're done.
You guys have given so much great input and insight, and I love it. I absolutely love these conversations. Know that these are not just conversations. We are putting things in place, working with legislation to make sure in January we have something to present from all of your time, these conversations, and your hard work. As Superintendent Doug did state, we do need to do this face-to-face, and we really wanted to. The numbers were just skyrocketing, so we wanted to keep everyone safe with this one. But we're hoping in January that we will be able to do a face-to-face to give you the all the input and where we're going with your information. So you'll know that these conversations are so worthwhile and that legislation is putting together bills and policies that's going to benefit everyone as a whole. And as far as the question in regards of racism, you have to make a choice not to be racist. Choose to love. It is that easy. Now, everyone is not going to want to choose to do that, and we know that. Let's pray for the ones that don't, and the ones that do, let's lock arms and show them what it looks like. So, Scott, I'm turning this back over to you. I am grateful, grateful, grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
With that, I'll just close out with this saying, scripture, Romans 12:18 says, if it is possible, as much as it depends on me, I will live at peace with all men. It tells me two things. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it doesn't depend on me. But as it is, I choose love, I choose peace. You all have been amazing. I will respect the time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mayor Burgess. I appreciate you for the privilege. You all have an amazing day.
Oh, one more. I'm sorry, Scott.
Yes.
You did an amazing job. Let's applaud him, please.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Take care, everybody.
You
Yeah,
as well.
thanks to you all
Thank you.
also.
Well done, Burgess people.